Hey guys, it's been a while since I've created anything, but I wanted to do a bit of a series on Semantic Kernel to show you guys how quickly you can get started with building a bit of an AI type app. And so the kernel is a open source initiative from Microsoft. It works really well. It's got a nice plugin for VS Code, which we'll look at later. But the objective behind today's video is going to be to show you how quickly you can get started, right? So what I've done in the back, I have just installed some configuration NuGet packages and the latest Semantic Kernel NuGet package. So we're just going to do that, and then we're going to jump straight into it, right? So first thing we'd want to do is create a config object through configuration builder. This is obviously going to complain in a second. Going to import my using statements just to make this simple. So the three that we're going to use here is configuration, semantic kernel, and semantic kernel chat completion. And then once I've got my config object, what I need is my three values from my config, right? And that's just to get going so we can have our sort of vanilla, just the Azure resources that we need. Okay. First thing you'd want to do when working with Semantic Kernel is create a new kernel builder. So I really love the approach that they've taken with this. It gives us that very familiar look and feel around the service kernel. So it feels like I'm building something modern, which is really great. Now, the thing with the builder is you can add quite a few things. All right, I can add a whole bunch of Azure OpenAI stuff, vector store, plugins, which we're going to take quite a bit of a look at, and then it's got its normal service collection, right, which is really good. The one we'd want to use today just to get going is the Azure OpenAI chat completion, and that implements or that creates a task or a class for us that implements iChat completion service, which is what we're going to look at in a second. And then in typical builder fashion, once we've added everything we want to add, we are just going to go and build our kernel, right? As I said, what we want to use today is the chat completion service. Now, instead of trying to go and instantiate something new and go and worry about clients and those kind of things, all I'm going to do is get the required service for iChat completion service from the kernel. Right, and this is really good. I really like this approach. Makes it very easy for us. Now, to get the most out of our chat completion service, we would want to have a chat history object. And now we can pass one message at a time, and that's great. But then the chatbot will not have context on the conversation. So what I'd want to do is quickly grab my chat history, which is also part of the semantic kernel namespace. Then fix the typo, and there we go. And then the final thing is just to write a bit of a chat loop, right? So in the console, we will just have a chat loop that reads the user input. It gets the chat message content from the history, and we pass in the kernel. Now, this is a habit that I suggest you get into. When you add plugins to your kernel and custom prompts and those kind of things, and you do not pass the kernel to this function, then the chat completion won't be aware of any of your custom plugins. We'll take a look at that experience in a few videos time, but for today's sake, just know that we want to pass in the kernel. It is optional, so you don't have to do it. And then finally, we want to grab the chat message content, as I said, from the response. Now, why do I have this explicitly written out where everywhere else I'm using var is because I want to show you, if I go response.content, it's not there. Response.text, it's not there. But I can do response.content. Now, if I go to my chat message content and I go into its definition, what I will see is a content property, right? So that's just how I got to that one. That is the easiest way to get to the bot's response. So if we had to quickly do a bit of a recap, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can see everything. We just instantiated a config with some values. We created the kernel builder and built the kernel, and then finally we got the iChat completion service out of the kernel. Now there are options we can pass in here, like max tokens, etc., etc. We'll take a look at that later. For now, what we want to do is just get going very quickly. So I'm going to save this and run it. And I'm just going to roll this up all the way. While we're waiting, Microsoft also released the stable Azure OpenAI SDK, so that would be quite useful to know. We're going to do a bit of a video on that to take a look at what's changed since we last used this about 6-7 months ago. So yeah, that will be in a coming up video as well. Okay, so that took a little longer than I'd hoped, but we're off to the races. Hello, and then my chatbot will start talking back to me. Okay, so that's it, right? Nice and easy, very, very, very quick to go. That's maybe 20 lines of code. It's very quick, right? Create a kernel builder, build the kernel, get the chat completion service, and do a bit of a while loop, and you've got a chatbot going. Now, obviously, when you're starting to work on APIs, those kind of things, this does change a little bit, but we will explore those together in the coming videos. So I will see you next time. Cheerio.